Welcome back to the second season of Who's That Leader in the Mirror with Sharon Blanchard, your host. That's me. This time around, we're going to look at leadership through the lens of Christian faith, through conversations with Mother Nancy, or Little Mama, as we call her. In this episode, we share our experiences around humanizing leadership, letting go of the ego, the freedom in vulnerability, and leveling the playing field through Jesus-led leadership. Welcome back. I think this is kind of officially our second episode. The first one was an intro, but welcome back, Nancy.
Thank you.
I'm saying welcome back, but you haven't really gone anywhere. But when we're in person, it's just so awesome. I love it. I just want to pick up on from our last time together and some of the things that we talked about, like humility, right? Relationship, trust, integrity, love. And want to talk a little bit, about all of those virtues, right? All of those attributes of what I perceive to be a fantastic, amazing, great leader in my little Sharon world. But it's also the stuff that really led me in my own career to try to search for that perfect leadership approach. And that's why, I guess the origin of principled leadership, that's where it came from. And at the time, I didn't really realize it. But I guess through the process of doing my doctorate, I really came to realize that it was based on the leadership of Jesus, or just based on the teachings of Jesus as a Christian woman, which I didn't know. But in the early days, like before I did my doctorate and when I was doing my master's in education, I absolutely fell in love with bell hooks.
Yeah.
Love bell hooks. And her quote, and I'm just going to quote here, "To truly serve, we must always empty the ego so that space can exist for us to recognize the needs of others and be capable of fulfilling them." I'm just going to read it again because I rushed through it a bit and I get overwhelmed. "But to truly serve, we must always empty the ego so that space can exist for us to recognize the needs of others and be capable of fulfilling them."
Yeah.
That just changed my whole world.
Yeah. That's
Right?
it, right?
That's it.
Said very concisely and beautifully.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's right. I think if we approach leadership from that point of view, that it's not about bolstering our own ego, but about empowering others in the greater good of all, right? Then we have no choice but to set aside our egos. Our egos want to make it all about us. And as a leader, it's not. And I think those are the principles that Jesus teaches, right? There's multiple stories in Scripture where disciples come, and one even where the disciples' mother comes and, talk about boundary violations right there. So, and say, who's going to be the greatest? Who's going to sit at your right hand? Which was the ultimate honor. Yeah. And Jesus,
it was John and James and John.
Yeah, and
right?
their mom coming in, even in one story, right?
Well, she was kind of getting them in trouble.
She was
stirring the pot.
But she was right in her mom mind.
Yeah,
she was taking care of her boys.
Right.
She was helping them get ahead.
Yeah.
But in Jesus-led leadership, it's not about getting ahead, but it's about following Jesus well. There's
following the who Jesus is well.
Right.
By being more like him.
And that's the goal of a disciple, right?
Yeah.
The goal of a disciple is to be like the leader, to be like the rabbi. And so that's our journey, our path. That's what it is to follow Jesus, to be on the way, is to work at being more and more like him every day in all that we do, not just when we're at church, but in all that we do. And so it is setting aside that ego. And Jesus when Jesus says the first shall be last and the last shall be first, right? He's leveling the playing field. He's not reversing the order. He's leveling things out. Because if the first are last and the last are first, there's no more first and last. There's all of us connected together, following who Jesus is, who becoming
there could be
like
people who will say, sorry, and I'll put on my Texas accent now. But that y'all in the secular world, in the corporate world, that could shake things up, right? Is that even feasible? And then when you look in the Christian faith and in the church, sure, we can all be Pollyanna. It's easier, right? It's easier to do it there because you're all loving Jesus, right? And if we're all loving Jesus, then we're all doing the right thing and following. But it doesn't always work out that way, right?
Right.
And so ideally, right? I'm not meaning to sound negative, but I just think if you take that model and you put it in the corporate world, yeah, right? What do you think is going to happen?
So I think you can absolutely take the model of humility and integrity as a leader and put it in the corporate world, and you don't have to...
You don't stamp it Jesus-led leadership because it'll all go, she's crazy.
Right. But you can, whatever other name you want to come up with to label it.
Yeah.
I think that setting aside our ego just makes us better human beings.
Yeah.
Whether you credit that to how Jesus teaches us to be, or not, it doesn't change it, I don't think.
Yeah.
And so, that knowing we are all just fellow human beings trying to be the best we are, the best we can be, and serving. And as a leader, right, my role is to make sure I'm always being the best I can be, work at that, knowing that, right, we'll mess up and we'll trip and we'll not get it right. But coming to the group I'm leading with those failings and saying, I messed up, I didn't do this well, help me learn how to do it better, right? To look to those we are leading to teach us just as we teach them.
And in normal kind of, I don't mean normal, but how do we normalize? Normal and abnormal.
Normal's just a setting on the washing
church setting
machine.
is really not the normal.
Right.
But, in those situations, right, to have the courage, like, those are signs of weakness in the corporate world.
I know, but then...
you can't use EQ, you can't use love. I mean, that's why I did my doctorate, I guess, in the end, was to try to test and see, are there any examples of, in the university sector, because universities are so corporate these days and they're run like corporations. And so it's like, are there any, you want to say the presidents who are more like CEOs out there that are running from that perspective, right? And those soft skills. And because that's seen as, if I'm saying I've made a mistake, well, you know what? You're on the chopping block in the corporate. You can't make mistakes. There's no room for making mistakes. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, so it's a huge learning curve and the trust, right, that you build with the people that you are with.
Yeah,
I mean, we get that in church land all the time, right? We have these priests in the church that just refuse to show any side of vulnerability to their parishioners, right? They have to be perfect.
Yeah.
And part of that is our misunderstanding of what perfect means, right? When coming from a faith-based perspective, and then I'll translate it into the corporate world. But, right, we think perfect means without flaw.
Yeah.
But in the way it's used in Scripture, the understanding of perfect is working towards completeness.
Yeah.
Right? And so when we are working towards being the best we can be, we are being perfect.
Yeah.
But it's a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Right? We think when perfect is used, we think without flaw.
Yeah.
But as humans, we are not flawless.
Yeah.
Right? We have failings and weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and that doesn't make us less human acknowledging them. It makes us more human because it acknowledges our whole humanness.
Yeah.
And I think people who see that in a leader when it's used well and navigated well and not used to paint the leader as a victim, But as a human,
Yeah.
right, I think people will respect and admire
Yeah.
because they go, wow, right, I can be human too. If you can be human with me, that gives me permission to be human with you.
It's so hard, though.
It is so hard.
Having been in that corporate world my entire career, it's really hard, right?
It is.
And I feel like, I feel like I met Brené Brown after my doctorate was completed, or semi near the end. And I feel like, if she was to come out and say, like, she's got such a, she has so much respect, I think, amongst leadership kind of gurus, and in the business sense, her research is just astounding and changing. It's game changing. But I think if she was to come out and say, because so much of her work, I realize, is aligned with what we're talking about. It's Jesus-led leadership.
Right.
She used to come out and say, you know what? We all just need to lead a little bit more like Jesus. Maybe she has, I don't know. But I think, you need to be able to step out into faith, because we still have this hammer down. It's like we talked about before, the God finger. These images of big, very patriarchal cultures where, you can't, I mean, it's happening right now in the world, but where you can't, you're afraid to make mistakes. You're afraid to be vulnerable, but you need people to step out in faith and say, you know what, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
And we always say in the church, we're after hearts, one soul at a time, right?
Yeah.
And I've taken that into this is a bit of a principled leadership commercial, but I say changing the world one principled leader at a time.
Yes. Because
it is about subscribing to this form of leadership, but understanding that, the compromise of self is lost when you subscribe to this kind of a leadership, right? So you're not compromising yourself. I talk a lot about, who I was as a coach, who I was as a mom, who I was as in my community, and volunteering was very different from who I was at work. At work, I was a little bit, I think I've said this before, a bulldozer. Right?
Yeah.
I didn't know who was in my wake behind me. I had to make change. I had to get it done. Da 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 da. And I was like the Pollyanna happy person, but still, I was motivated by right? I was motivated by my career. I was motivated by making change and reaching goals and objectives. But who for me? My ego, right?
Yeah, right.
And so it comes back to that bell hooks, letting go of the ego so that you can serve others in a leadership capacity.
Yeah.
That's what Jesus said.
Yeah.
Or did, or how he enacted.
Yeah.
That's the leadership style you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. But it is a change in our culture and in our Western world, right? Collective.
Yeah.
That power is understood as being over someone, not with someone.
Yeah.
And to redirect our understanding of power.
Yeah.
Right. And that to redirect the understanding that vulnerability is weakness versus vulnerability is part of who we are as humans.
Yeah.
Right. And the understanding of that. And Jesus started with 12, right? He didn't step onto the world stage and proclaim it and say, everybody. He's like, right, this is relational. And I think that's how, if we want to make a change to our understanding as humans, as people, it has to be relational. That's how God does it. That's how Jesus steps in. And so that's part of our leadership style, right? Is I have to see you as a human, as a person, not as a cog in the wheel to whatever end goal is going to boost my ego.
Yeah.
And that my role is to help all of us. And I see it in the church so often, right? I remember one situation in one of my first parishes, right? We were preparing care bags for a vulnerable group of people in our community. And one of the priests who was leading this with me was had a very competitive personality. and promoted this as a how do we make the most of these care bags? How do we be the group that makes the most?
Right.
And
what was what was his like?
It's just he was like a very competitive person, right?
Hilarious.
So his thing was, we're going to make the most of anybody, right? And
right.
His heart was in a good place. He was trying to help people, but that was his method of motivating others, right? Let's get as many made tonight as we can. And so he kicked us off with that energy, and I called everybody's attention back and said, let's remember that we're making each one of these care packages for a person that's hurting and in need. And let's make them in a prayerful attitude. And I led us, and I don't tell the story to brag on myself, but just to show the difference, right? And I led us in prayer. And some of the people went forward with that energy of we've got to do more, and some slowed down, and I would watch them pray over the bags, right? So neither one of us captured the whole room with our method. People did what they were drawn to. But right, even that attitude of we got to be the best.
But what about navigating it? It's interesting because he said a thing and then you said this. How did you navigate the communication there?
Well,
to ensure that you were both on this,
I thought in our conversation ahead of time that we were on the same page because I had voiced this need. We'd done them before. And I said, I think we need to slow it down and make it more prayerful. And he just went with his own energy. And then the next day, right, it didn't go well. He accused me of undermining his leadership. And it was a hard thing. It caused damage to our leadership relationship as two leaders working together. But I still, right to this day, I still feel like it was the right thing for me to do. And some people who heard my method came and were appreciative, right? Thank you for reminding us that these are people receiving these and that we're not just making bags, but we are helping and serving. And so
the teachable moment in all of that, because it's a great teachable moment, right? And so how do you navigate those and have those courageous, tough discussions without undermining both of the respect and dignity of each other? One of the things that I use with my clients is I talk about the invisible button, right? And that you wear this invisible button but you eventually get to the point where it's invisible, but it's there, it permeating like a button on you. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I call it the invisible button. But that when you have it on, it basically it says, I maintain the dignity and respect of every person I come into contact with, right? And so if you imagine a workforce in which everyone has that button on, right? How are you going to engage with each other, right? What's that look like? And so I live in this ideal world, where we're all treating and enabling and empowering each other with that as our, as our foundation. But, there are days when you might not have that button on, but somebody else sees it on you.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so how do you ensure in those moments that, because it's the communication that kicks us in the butt, isn't it?
Well, and that was the learning thing for me, right? Was what I thought was communication was simply two people sharing their ideas, right? There was no bringing those two. How can we do both? Right? How can we fulfill our quota? We had promised to make so many of these bags for the group we were making them for, and make it a prayerful situation as well, right? We each communicated our ideas, and then didn't bring those two ideas together. And so for me, because I can only improve my own skills, was to give myself permission to take what I call taking up space, right? Take up space with additional questions, right? So you've voiced your way of doing it, and here's my way, And then follow that with, how do we bring these two together? They both have something valuable to offer, and how do we work them together? And to be that collaborative, I mean, at that point, we would have just stepped into cooperation and not all the way to the collaboration.
And so when you look at Jesus-led leadership, what are the attributes of Jesus-led leadership that allows people to get into that space?
That we all have something to contribute, right? Every person has something valuable to contribute to the greater good. And to think what I call both and instead of either or, right? So we both had something valuable, and we need to merge those two things. And so just enabling that ability, right? That button that says, if I value you as a fellow person, fellow human, I know you have something valuable to add to this as well.
And the big thing that, even as I'm listening to you, that big takeaway for me, not that we're trying, it's happened before,
We're solving all the world's problems.
I know, right? But I think the big thing for that in me is that the courage to have the conversation the next day with integrity, with an authentic, honest conversation, and to trust. When you have trust in relationship, it enables those really, putting my two fists together. But, because we come together in leadership with conflict. But it's how do we approach healthy conflict? How do we approach those constructive, healthy conversations, and this is not to be talking about, well, I mean, I do really like the work that she does, Brené Brown, but those courageous conversations, right? And so courage, right? To have the courage to just, approach each other with love, with honesty, with trust. Because if you don't have that, you don't have that capability.
Right.
If you don't have that trust. Right. So you have to build that trust.
And we have to understand that conflict happens.
That's right.
We've put a negative label on conflict, but conflict happens all the time.
Yeah.
And to avoid conflict doesn't solve it.
Yeah.
Right? That we've got to use the word courageous, right? We have to be courageous in that. I'm going to step forward and name the conflict I'm experiencing and ask you to express how you're experiencing it too.
Yeah.
And then, right, again, how do we bring the two together? Your experience and my experience for the greater good of all.
Yeah. And I like you, I've had many, many unhealthy conflict experiences, and I think when you go into the boardroom and you're challenged by all kinds of dynamics, right? It might be age, gender, experience, perception. It might be a culture where you can't make mistakes, where I know I've worked in for many, many years of my career. And so it's been that search for me in the sense of trying to find a leadership approach that doesn't compromise who I want to be. So that you can, at the end of the day, look at yourself in the mirror and go, I did the best that I could do. But, I'm a sinner. And I mean, to put it in the Christian, in the concept, I every single day, right? And I'm not perfect, but I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to try to do better, and I'm going to be better. And for me, working in that corporate world, that's what I was trying to be. I think it was reconciling that Christian, and even I was so imperfect, to the corporate world. Because I would pray, God, just take me out of the world. I want to just be in a convent. But I was a mom with 3 kids and a volunteer and a coach and doing all this great stuff. He's like, I'm not taking you, right?
You are.
You serve me
in the world, but not of it, right?
That's right.
And so
which is the biggest
serve
challenge.
in the world.
Yeah.
And that, right, reframing things so that we take out that word, the understanding that perfect is without flaw, and say, I am working toward in a lifelong journey to be who God made me to be, right? That's perfection. It's a journey. It's not a certain point. And so, you are working towards being who God made you to be. And in that, you are perfection.
Amen, sister. Thank you. Thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thanks so much, Nancy.
Thanks.
Thanks for taking the time to share in our journey today. There's so many takeaways for me. Perfection and our journey towards completeness in Jesus. And I love Nancy's line. Normal is just a setting on the washing machine. Too awesome, right? What is normal anyway? And just a wee clarification. I never actually met Brené Brown in person, but simply through her great work. Be sure to tune into our next episode where Nancy and I talk about the feminine in leadership. We'll see you there.